Traefik Reverse Proxy is, in my opinion, the best dynamic reverse proxy for Docker and non-Docker services. Let's see how to set up Traefik and expose your services safely over the internet. This beginner's guide is going to be a long one, but trust me, it's going to save you a lot of headache in the long run. So hang tight. What's up, Geek Army? Anand here with another exciting video. This is probably going to be my most favorite one. So far, we have installed Docker in an Ubuntu environment. We used rclone to mount some remote folders. And in my last video, we got started with building the ultimate Docker media server. Links to all those videos are in the description below. There's only one drawback so far, which is all the services that we have installed so far are only accessible from within our home network. There are a few different ways to safely expose your services. For example, Nginx Proxy Manager, Cloudflare Tunnels, overlay mesh networks like Zero Tier or Tailscale, and we of course have VPN and WireGuard as well. I am going to cover all of these options in detail in future videos, so like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when those things come out. But today, let's focus on Traefik, which is one of the most exciting options in my opinion. I firmly believe that even if you got started with one of those other options I just mentioned, eventually, as you become more comfortable with your home lab and Docker, you will be drawn to Traefik. And with Traefik version 3 coming out just a few days back, I thought this is a perfect time to make a video on how to set up Traefik version 3 and expose your services safely over the internet with legitimate Let's Encrypt certificate. If you like my style, check out my website. I have over 1,000 articles, including the most comprehensive Traefik 3 guide that you will find on the internet. Plus, now these videos. Now, this is probably the third time me recording this video, and I would probably spend hundreds of dollars editing this video. So every bit of support that I can get from you will be much appreciated. So check out the membership options that I have on my website as well. So let's continue the journey from where we left off at the end of my ultimate Docker media server video. Okay, here I am on my Proxmox virtualization environment on the Proxmox LXC UDMS ultimate Docker media server that I created at the end of my last video. I'm already SSH'd into this Proxmox LXC. As you can see, it runs 22.04. The process is exactly the same for Ubuntu 24.04 that just came out. Okay, today we're going to be using a few helper stuff. The first one is my Traefik guide, which was updated a few days back. Link again in the description below. This is for Traefik version 3. Next helper document that we're going to use, or helper resource that we're going to use, is my GitHub repository. I have everything in here, lots of awesome stuff. One of my Docker hosts is updated for Traefik version 3, which is my home server. The Docker compose file is right there, so we're going to be using that today. The last one is the most important one in my opinion. It is my super fancy PowerPoint checklist. Yes, I made a PowerPoint. Of course, I've been making PowerPoints for 20 years, so I cannot break that habit. So bear with me. We have this PowerPoint to help us through today, okay? As you can see, we will be covering a lot of things today, and it's going to be a long video already, so unfortunately, I will have to do this in two parts. Today, we're gonna set up Traefik with the dashboard. We're gonna pull proper Let's Encrypt certificates, and we're gonna call it a day at that point. In my next video, I'm going to show you how to put some of the services, both Docker and non-Docker services, behind Traefik. So watch out for that. Like and subscribe so you will be notified when that video comes out. Let's keep moving. So here I am on my Traefik guide. So as you can see, this Traefik guide is part of a ultimate Docker server series made up of many different guides. We are at step number 5 right there. Obviously, there are a few things here and there that I still need to fill, but I assume that you have already followed the first two or watched my previous videos. So let's keep moving. Many people have asked me where I run my stuff. If you haven't watched a tour of my mini home lab, this information might be new to you. I use Top 10 V700 mini PC that I got off of AliExpress to run my Proxmox as well as many virtualization environments within it. LXCs, virtual machines, so many different things. It also does hardware transcoding for Plex and Jellyfin. A separate video on setting up Plex and Jellyfin is coming out in the coming days, so watch out for that. Moving on, if you have followed my previous guides on Traefik version 2 and are ready to migrate to version 3, there are some pointers for you. We will not be covering those things today because the assumption is that you are starting out from scratch on Traefik version 3. So we will skip this part. And the last point, today we're going to be covering a lot of different steps. It's really easy to miss something. A lot of people have given up on Traefik because they couldn't go through the entire process. If you are one of those people, check out Auto Traefik. It automates a lot of different things related to Homelab setup, including setting up traffic with proper Let's Encrypt certificate. It can even set up an authentication layer for you like Authelia or Google OAuth. I'm continuing to add a lot more features to it. In fact, many of the things that we will do today is also included for free in the script, and if you feel like supporting my work, you can always upgrade to show your appreciation. I do want to mention that everything that the script does is possible without having to pay for the script just by following my guides and videos, but this is available as a convenience feature for my supporters. Okay, moving on. Let's keep going. I will be taking a lot of shortcuts today, so if you haven't watched some of my previous videos, I will frequently ask you to go back and watch those videos. So before we get started, I would like to quickly explain just some basic concepts about Traefik in just 1 minute. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this topic, but I'm going to tell you just what you need to know. Traefik has 3 main components, at least for this guide. That's what you need to know: routers, middlewares, and services. Routers are like front ends. This is where your requests come in. Services are the real actual services that will respond to a request. And in the middle is obviously the middleware. So when the request comes in and is trying to reach a service, you can modify that request, maybe add an authentication layer in between. That's where middleware comes in. So this is all I would like you to take home today, and let's continue building our Traefik Docker Compose. We're going to be working on Cloudflare first, doing some basic stuff, then we'll go through some system checks. This again is included for free in the Auto Traefik script. Try it out. Also, I'm calling the Auto Traefik script Auto Traefik today, but it does a lot more than just traffic, so I will at some point rename the script as well, so watch out for that. Just a quick note. Next, we're going to do some prep work in the Docker environment, then we're really ready to get started with Traefik. So let's keep moving. I'm going to switch over to my Cloudflare environment. The first thing that we're going to do is to set up our DNS records. As you can see, there are 2. First one is the A record pointing to the public IP address of my Docker host. If it's a home environment, it's my WAN IP provided by the internet service provider. If you're running this in a virtual private server, obviously this is the public IP of your virtual private server. Next is the CNAME record, a wildcard CNAME record with the asterisk over there pointing to the root domain. Now there are different ways to do this. Some people like to explicitly specify all the CNAME records, which are basically your subdomains, like traefik.simplehomelab.com. A wildcard record will point all subdomains to your public IP. This is simpler, this is convenient, but some people may not agree with this. Some people may like to explicitly specify all the subdomains as CNAME records, which is fine too. We will deal with that in a separate video. Simple-Homelab.com, if you didn't know, that's the domain that I use for my guides and videos. Okay, moving on. The next thing we're gonna do is change the SSL type. In my case, it's already set to full, as you can see here. So go into SSL settings from the left side, go into the type and change it to full if it's not already set to full. The third thing we're gonna do is to create the scoped API token that Traefik will use. For this, you will have to go into your profile. So click on the icon on the right side top corner, go into your profile and API tokens. So I am in my API token screen. You can see that I already have several API tokens created for different purposes. Today, we're gonna create the API token that we will use very soon. There are some predetermined templates available, but we're going to create something from scratch. So let's do that. I'm going to call this Traefik 3 demo. And for the permissions, this is very key. Many people report problems because they haven't set this one up correctly. So we need zone read permissions. Basically, Traefik needs permission to read all of your zones. which are domains basically. And we also need zone DNS edit permissions because Traefik needs to create some records. So let's scroll all the way down to DNS and we're gonna choose edit. Make sure you do this right. I've seen many people come to our Discord server, report problems, and only to find out later on that they didn't give the right permissions. Okay, then include, right now it includes all zones by default. I don't want that. I want this token only to apply to a specific zone, Simple-Homelab.com. So I'm gonna choose specific zone, and from the drop down I'm going to choose Simple-Homelab.com, like so. That's it, and that's it. There are a few other options right here to restrict the usage of the token. We're not gonna cover all of that stuff right now. Let's go to summary. Here is the summary: zone read and zone DNS edit. Let's create the token. Obviously this is just a dummy token for now. I would delete the token as soon as we are done with it, so don't worry guys. I just copied it. I'm gonna open a notepad session and I'm gonna keep this right there for using later on. Okay, so let's go back to my super awesome checklist. We are done with the DNS, we're done with the SSL type, scoped API token. Let's go back and do some checks. Okay, so first I'm gonna head over to my Ultimate Docker Media Server Ubuntu environment, which if you haven't watched already, go back and watch it. But we created Docker containers, 5 of them: Dozel, Socket Proxy, Homepage, Portainer, and Jellyfin. So let's see if those are still running. DPS, and there you go. I have 5 containers running, but Jellyfin obviously has exited for some reason. We'll figure that out. It doesn't really matter for now, but notice that I used DPS. Basically, this is a short form for sudo docker ps. And if you're really confused about this whole stuff, watch my previous video. I use bash aliases to simplify Docker and Docker Compose commands. That really speeds up my activities in the command line. And today we're going to be using a lot of long commands and that will be a waste of time. So I use bash aliases. If you watch my last video, you will know that it takes literally 2 to 3 seconds to just copy paste my template into your environment. You should be able to run all these commands in short form like I'm going to do today. So as in my checklist, the first thing to do is to stop everything. Once again, the long command would be sudo docker compose -f and patch to the docker compose file. So if we go into our Docker environment right here that we created in my past videos and do a ls-al or -al, we're going to see all the things that are listed here. This is where the Docker Compose file is, or the master Docker Compose file, which is an index of all the different Compose files that exist within the Compose folder for various services. I recently broke up all my services into their own Compose files and they go into this Compose folder. Now, if you are coming to this video directly and haven't watched my previous videos, just very quickly, app data is where all the data for all your services or applications will be stored. Compose is where all the individual Docker Compose files are. The logs is where all the logs will go, at least for the ones that we care about. Secrets is where we are going to create some Docker secrets to keep some of the sensitive information. Shared folder is to just share some information across different containers. We may or may not use it, so don't worry about it for now. .env is the file that will have the environment variables that we will use in our Compose files. And as I just said, the last one is the master Docker Compose file. I like to append the host name at the end of my Docker Compose files just because I combine everything and push it into my GitHub repo. So if I go back to my GitHub right there and scroll down, you're going to see several different Docker Compose files. They all come from different Docker hosts and it helps me identify where they're coming from. Plus, I avoid all the conflicts when I'm pushing all of the stuff to the GitHub repo. So it's entirely up to you guys how you do it. You don't need to have that suffix of host name, but keep in mind that if you want to maintain compatibility with the auto traffic script, then just follow what I am showing you today. It doesn't hurt. Okay, moving on, how will we stop the whole stacks? That would be sudo docker compose -f and path to the Docker Compose file, which would be like so, and down. This is the normal way of doing it. This is the only time I'm going to show you the long command. I'm going to be using the shortcut from now on just to save time. So DC down is the shortcut, which is basically Docker compose down, and it brings down the whole thing. So we just finished the first step right there, stopped stack. Okay, moving on. Next, we have to check if port 80 and 443 are free. So if we go back to my guide, okay, all the commands are already explained in this case. So just if you're lost with me using all the bash aliases, you can always go back and check my guide. Okay, the command that we're going to use to check if the ports are free is right here, netstat -tulpn and grep listen. This is going to show all the ports that are listening on your Docker host. But once again, we're going to use my bash aliases. So ports used is going to show me a list of all the ports that are in here. I can also grep for 80 of not that way. Grep 80 is going to show me if anything is listening on port 80. I get no response. That means nothing is listening. The same way 443, and nothing is listening there as well. So we finished the next point. So great. Moving on, firewall. One thing I will say upfront that Docker does not respect firewall rules. It creates its own rules to bypass the firewalls that are in place in your Docker host. This many people do not like, and one reason why people may prefer Podman over Docker. Just something to keep in mind, as long as you have another layer of protection on top, you should be okay. So in a home environment, routers or internet gateways usually have port forwarding. So if you only forward port 80 and 443 to your Docker host, all the other ports are going to be blocked by default. So you should be good to go. On top of that, if you have, let's say, Proxmox, it has several layers of firewall as well. You can activate those firewall as well. So if you do that, then whether Docker respects the firewall rules inside the virtual machine or Proxmox LXC does not really matter. Now, if you're in a virtual private server, then make sure that your VPS provider does give you an environment to set up additional firewall rules. I use DigitalOcean, and they give a separate screen where I can set up which ports are allowed into the droplet and which ones are not. So I use that to restrict access to ports on my VPS. Okay, with that in mind, let's go back to my command line right there. So once again, a bash alias, it's all in my bash alias file. By the way, maybe I'll just take a quick moment to show you where all the bash aliases are. If you are in my GitHub right there and go to shared folder right there and bash aliases, you're going to see all the bash aliases that I will be using today. So there are Docker commands on top and Docker compose commands right below that, and several other Linux commands that I have simplified. So UFW is what we will be using today. So if I go back to my command line and type UFW list, it's going to show me my firewall rules right now, which is I'm allowing all connections from inside my home network 192.168.1.0. We're going to add a few more just in case, because there are ways to make sure Docker respects the firewall rules. We won't cover that today, but just keep in mind that, you know, Docker is not great with firewall, at least at this point. We're still going to add our port. So sudo UFW allow 80. This is going to allow port 80, and UFW allow, which is my bash alias, 443. This is going to allow port 443. Now if I do UFW list, it's going to show me all the rules that are in here. So you can see from before and after, we've added a few more rules. Back to my super fancy checklist, we finished the firewalls. Next to port forwarding. Every router or internet gateway is different. Make sure that you forward ports 80 and 443 on your router. So from outside your home network or the internet, port 80 and 443 should be forwarded to port 80 and 443 on your Docker host. Make sure that you do this, otherwise you're gonna have timeout errors and lots of different things that, you know, Cloudflare errors, many different things. In fact, watch out for my future video. I'm going to set up some things today, but in my next video or the one after, I will intentionally break some stuff, make some mistakes, so you guys can see what can go wrong if something is not done properly. So it's basically like a troubleshooting video that you can use if something goes wrong, okay? So moving on, I already forwarded ports 80 and 443 from my router to my Docker host. Now, some people may consider that forwarding ports is not the best way to do it. You know, there are different schools of thought. It's fine. Yes, they are valid in thinking that way. For today, we'll just forward 80 and 443 and keep moving. I have been doing this for many years now, and you know, I haven't had any issues so far. Let's keep moving. Then we're going to install some required packages. For this, I will go back to my guide and we are going to search for packages right there. So if you follow the guide, you're going to see these things in order. Today I'm going up and down. So if I click right there and open it in a new window, it's going to show me all the different packages that we are going to install today. Now, if you followed my previous videos, these commands should have already been executed. You should already have these packages. If not, here we're just going to install. As you can see, most of them were already installed except the Apache 2-utils package. So I'm going to install that right now. Then we are basically done with all the requirements. Now we're ready to get started with prepping our Docker environment. We already saw the folder structure. Now you should already have the .env file if you followed my guide or my previous videos. Now we are going to add 3 more environment variables to our .env file, which are right here. The domain name, the local IPs, and the Cloudflare IPs. Okay, so let me copy those 3 lines and go back to my Docker root folder. You don't have to make any major changes. So nano.env, and I'm gonna paste it right at the end of this file. Okay, so the only thing you might have to edit here is the domain name. In this case, Simple-Homelab.com. Use yours, obviously. Local IPs are local IP ranges in a typical home environment or a LAN environment. And then we have the Cloudflare IPs. Now, if you want to identify the IP address of the visitor visiting your services, which I assume everybody wants to, it's better to identify which IPs are coming from Cloudflare servers themselves. So we'll list all the Cloudflare IPs right here. Save these files and exit out. We've done that. Let's go back to my guide and continue. Okay, so next we're going to create the basic authentication username and password. As the name says, it's very basic. It's just a pop-up window that you will see when you try to access your services. So username and password for that. Keep in mind that basic authentication is very easy to crack. So eventually, I strongly recommend that you upgrade to either Authelia or Google OAuth or Authentic. Watch out for videos on that. If you cannot wait, obviously check out the guides that I have on my website on those topics. Okay, moving on, we are going to create the username and password. So let's copy this file right here. We're gonna cut our command right here and paste it in our notepad file that we just have. Let's replace the username with the Anand, and password is going to be a really strong one too, Anand. Of course, pick a strong password, guys. I don't have to say this. If you didn't know that by now, you shouldn't even be watching this video. Okay, so let's copy this over and paste it in the command line right here, and that's going to create the username and password. Where did it create? It's right here, home Anand Docker secrets, and the name of the file is basic auth credentials. So let's elevate ourselves to sudo. Let's go to secrets and ls, and you're going to see that file. Actually, I'll go clear the screen and do an ls so you guys can see where it is. Now if I do cat and the name of the file, you're going to see the username and password. The password is not exactly I typed because it's been hashed. Hashed passwords appear differently, so you can see. So it's all encrypted here. Okay, so let's exit out of being a root and go back to my guide. So that part is done. Let's keep moving. Next is the Cloudflare DNS API token. Now there are different ways to validate your account with Cloudflare. You can see that here. Cloudflare email plus global API key, which is the way I was doing in the past. It's not the most secure way to do it. In this version of the guide or the video, I am using scoped API token, which is more secure. Okay, so if you want to be even more secure, then you can do a scoped API token for DNS as well as scoped API token just for the zone itself. But in this case, as we just saw, we have one token with both permissions included. So we're right in between there, so not too bad. Okay, the process is explained right here. We already did all of that stuff. Here we have that token. So using that right now, let's create our secret. Actually, I shouldn't have exited out of being sudo. So let's go back to my secrets folder right there. I'm going to say cf DNS API token. This is the file that's going to have our token. Right click and paste that token, press Ctrl X, Y, and enter to save the file. So we created the secret as well. That's it. Now we're ready to get started with creating some files and folders for Traefik. You can see those things right here. I know them by heart, so I'm just going to start doing those, okay? So let's go into app data folder, mkdir Traefik 3, which is where all our files will be. I still use Traefik 2, so when I combine all that information, I don't want them to conflict with each other, so I am renaming the folder to Traefik 3, so I can still continue to use Traefik 2 folder for Traefik 2 specific configuration. You guys can do what you want, but once again, if you want compatibility with the auto Traefik script, then just follow what I'm showing here. So cd Traefik 3, mkdir rules. This is where all our file providers will go. I will explain what those things are. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's keep moving. And I'm going to do mkdir acme, and I'm going to go into acme folder and touch acme.json. Okay, Docker, if you didn't know by now, if you specify some stuff in the volume section of the Docker compose file, it can create those folders, missing folders for you, like rules and acme and all of that stuff. But Docker cannot create missing files that are in Docker compose file. If you didn't know that by now, keep that in mind. This is why we are creating an empty file called acme.json. That's because Docker cannot create it for us. Acme.json needs to be of a specific permission, so chmod 600 acme.json. This is one of the most common errors people make, and when they come back to my Discord server reported, this is one of the things I commonly ask them. They forget to set the permissions for acme.json, and Traefik will not start if it's not the right permissions, okay? So we did that. If I did ls-al, you're going to see that it's 600 permissions, okay? Moving on, let's move over to the rules folder. I'm going to create one more folder here, mkdir udms. As I mentioned, I like to keep all the rules and file providers for specific Docker hosts and specific folders. This is why. So if I go into udms, I will have all my file providers. Of course, I don't have any right now, but this is it. I think we finished all of, well, there's one more. We didn't create any folder for logs, I believe. So let's go over to the Docker root folder. We're going to go to the logs folder there, and you will see udms, but inside that I don't see anything. So let's create a mkdir Traefik, which is where all the Traefik logs will be. And once again, we'll have to touch empty files. So touch access.log for access logs, and touch Traefik.log for all the errors that we might see. Okay, I think we've done pretty much everything that my super fancy checklist calls for. Actually, I just realized something we skipped. We did the Docker environment, we did the env file, we did not do Socket Proxy. It's okay, we'll go back and do it right now. We also jumped ahead and we did the HT password, or the basic authentication. We also did CF DNS API token. We also created the Traefik 3 folder, rules folder, acme folder, acme.json, Traefik.log, access.log. We'll come back to the middlewares later on. Let's go back and start Socket Proxy. If you do not have Socket Proxy right now, it's outside the scope of this guide. Go back and watch my previous video on getting started with Ultimate Docker Server. So I'm gonna go into my Docker folder right there and open my Docker compose file. And here it is. As you can see, I have 5 different services, and once again, this Docker compose file is like an index file that calls the Docker compose files for various services: Socket Proxy, Portainer, Dozel, homepage, and Jellyfin from the compose folder. So at this point, we're going to comment out a few things because we don't want them running. If you remember, we already stopped all of the services, so the only thing we need is Socket Proxy. We will leave that on. As you can see, everything else is grayed out, and yes, I want to save this. I saved it. Now again, I'm going to use my bash aliases to start the whole stack. If I do dc up, which is basically Docker compose up, it starts my whole stack, and you can see Socket Proxy is running. So let's go back to the checklist. We finished this part right here. And now we have to start creating some middleware. So if you scroll down in my guide, this is all explained. Again, the auto traffic script, as you can see, automates whatever we are doing right now. It's just in a few seconds, you will have all the files and folders that you need with the right permissions. Okay, moving on. Traefik needs its own network. So any service that you want to make available using its own domain name and the authentication and everything, it has to belong to the Traefik network. So let's create the Traefik network right now. Copy this right here, and we're going to go back to the Docker Compose file, the master Docker Compose file, paste it under the network section. Oh, I didn't copy the whole thing. Let's go back to my guide and copy it again. And I'm going to go back to this file and all the way to the end of the network section, and right there. T3 proxy is the name of the proxy that I am using. You guys can use what you want, but once again, if you want to maintain compatibility with auto traffic, leave it as is. For my previous versions, which were on Traefik version 2, it was T2 proxy. And we're going to use the VLAN 90 for for this network. All the services that will belong to the Traefik network will have IP addresses in the range 192.168.90.1234.5 and so on until 254. Okay, moving on, we did that part. We created the network. Then we're gonna start adding the secrets. We created 2 secrets already. We need to add them to the master Docker Compose file. So copy these 2 sections right there and paste it right below. Did I copy the whole thing? Yes, right below where the networks go. You can go anywhere, but this is where I like it. So let's paste it there. So basically we're calling the 2 different secrets file we just created a few minutes back. So those things are called in. Let's keep moving. Then what we're gonna do right now is create the Traefik Docker Compose file. As I explained in my previous video, I like to call some of the services as core services. This is why you see this word core right there. Again, it's just for fanciness or making the Docker Compose file look nice and whatever. But I also use Docker profiles where I do use these words right there. So if Docker profiles is an advanced topic, I use it for automation purposes. I will cover that in a separate video. Watch out for that. For now, let's copy paste this line and change it to Traefik because that will be our Docker Compose file. Save it. Yes, we saved it. Let's go back to my guide right now and continue. Now we're ready to get started with the Traefik Docker Compose file. Here's the really long one. I'm going to copy paste the whole thing and create the file, and I'll explain it very quickly again. But always go back to the guide. Do not skip reading my guide because it really does have a lot of useful information. So into the Compose folder, UDMS folder, let's create a new file called Traefik.yaml, and I'm going to edit this file and I will paste my compose that I just copied. So we're going to do this very quickly. It's a long one. Okay, there are many different ways to do it. No way is wrong or no way is better. It's just personal preference in my opinion. So first, we're using Traefik version 3, as you can see right there. Here's profiles, it's commented out. If you don't know what this means, watch my getting started with the ultimate Docker server video. Then Traefik proxy network. We're obviously making Traefik part of the Traefik proxy network. We're assigning a static IP for Traefik, which is this, but you can essentially comment this out as well because having a static IP, I haven't really found it very useful, but I do it just to show you guys. So if you have a service that you want to set a static IP, this is how you do it, okay? And Traefik obviously belongs to the Socket Proxy network as well, because Traefik needs access to the Docker socket. Now, here's where all the configuration for Traefik happens. Now, Traefik configuration can be done in 2 different ways: dynamic configuration, static configuration. Basically, the only thing that you need to keep in mind right now is dynamic configurations are picked up by Traefik in real time. As soon as they become available, you don't really need to restart Traefik. Static configurations will require Traefik to be restarted. Now, there are different ways to provide each of these. Static configuration can be provided as a configuration file, Traefik.yaml or Traefik.toml. Do not confuse this Traefik.yaml with the Docker Compose file that we just created. This YAML file specifies the configuration, static configuration for Traefik. We're not going to be using this. We are going to be using the command line arguments, which is option number 2. And there are a few other ways, environment variables as well, but we'll be using the second option right there. So if I go back in to my Traefik Docker Compose file, these are the CLI or command line way of configuring Traefik. Okay, so version check is turned on. We are creating some entry points. Entry points are the points through which Traefik can, or when I say Traefik, internet requests or Traefik can enter ports 80 and 443. There are some advanced configurations here as well. You can create separate entry points for traffic that comes from within your home network or those that come from outside your home network. We're not going to go into that. I will cover that in a new video as well. It's a more secure way of doing it, so watch out for that as well. Okay. And then we have some CLI arguments to redirect HTTP traffic to HTTPS, which is a more secure protocol. Then we're turning on logging. Error logs will be right here, traefik.log. We created that file. If you remember, we are calling that in /logs/traefik.log inside the container. So we will have to map the file that we just created on the Docker host to this location inside the Traefik container. Just keep that in mind. We will leave the log level at debug to start with, and say where we have access logs. Now access logs can fill up really quickly depending on the amount of traffic that you have. For Homelab environment where there's just one or two different people, you can log everything basically. For otherwise, you can use filters to filter out only the situations that you want to log in the access.log, which is what I do for my website, which gets thousands of visitors. I don't want so many things being logged. Okay, we're enabling the Docker provider as well. What does this mean? If we go back to my Traefik guide, you're going to see that the dynamic configuration can be provided in two different ways, which is the Docker provider or the file provider. Docker provider, basically we're defining the configuration inside the Docker Compose file. With the file provider, this will be an external YAML file. We will not be using it. I shouldn't say that. Some of the middlewares that we will create today will be a file provider, so we will have a look at that one as well. Okay, so going back to my Compose file, moving on, we're saying where the Socket Proxy is available for Traefik to connect to. We are saying that all the services in our Docker Compose file will not be exposed to Traefik by default, and that we will have to explicitly expose them or put them behind Traefik. We are saying that the provider's network is T3 proxy, which we just defined. And if you use Docker Swarm, the syntax for it changed in version 3. Keep an eye out for that. We're not using Docker Swarm, so it's all commented out. We will need to specify the specifications for TLS, and that will be provided in this file right here, TLS ops. We haven't created that file yet. We're specifying Cloudflare as a DNS resolver, and we're specifying the domain names that we will be using today, which is Simple-Homelab.com. That will be domain name, and within the parentheses there, 0 or square bracket 0 refers to the first domain. If you want to add additional domains, you can copy paste these two lines and then change it 1, 2, 3, and 4 and provide a different domain name if you want, and Traefik will pull the certificates for those domains as well. Moving on, we have the rules folder where all the file providers will exist. Once we start reading those, you're going to understand that. And next, we are saying that Traefik watch this folder, so when new files are added, it automatically picks it up and implements it, hence dynamic configuration. And then we have the acme.json file, which is where the certificates will go. Okay, so and then moving on, we are exposing some ports, port 80 and 443 for Traefik to function. We have disabled port 8080 just because the Traefik Dashboard is available on this port. Just because we have disabled the insecure API, we are going to make Traefik Dashboard available only through Traefik using a fully qualified domain name. So this is why it's disabled. If you want to have Traefik Dashboard access inside your home network without the usage of the domain name, so you can use the Docker host IP method, then you will have to uncomment these lines and also enable API insecure. That way you're able to connect to the dashboard without the domain name itself. Okay, so moving on, volumes, we are specifying the rules folder where it is on the host side and where it will be inside the Traefik container, which is /rules. We are disabling access to Docker socket because that's going to come through the socket proxy. We are passing on the acme.json from host to inside the container /acme.json. And finally, the Traefik logs folder we created will be /logs inside the container. We also have some environment variables right there, the time zone, the Cloudflare DNS API token as a secret file, which will be located in /run/secrets. This is where all Docker secrets will be loaded by default inside a container. The name of the secret file itself right there, CFDNS API token. Same way, the HT password file will be basic auth credentials file inside the /run/secrets folder as well. Okay, and lastly, we're passing on the domain name, which is Simple-Homelab.com, into the Traefik container. I will explain how this works when in the next video, when we start putting some services, non-Docker services behind Traefik. We will be using that. In today's video, we won't be using that. And then finally, this is another requirement for secrets to work, where you will list all the secrets that will be used by this container, which is 2 in this case. And the last section, we're specifying Docker labels. Remember that we specified all the services to not be exposed to Traefik by default. So to enable on a service by service basis, you have to add this line to enable Traefik. Then we're specifying the entry point to be web secure, which is the HTTPS entry point. And then finally, we're also saying that Traefik Dashboard be available at traefik.simplehomelab.com. We also need to tell Traefik where the service is listening at, and that would be API at internal. This is a different way of specifying where the service is listening. It only works for Traefik. For most services, we will be listing the port number where the service is listening at inside the services container. You will see that when we start adding some services in the next video. Okay, lastly, middlewares. Now, you don't really need middleware. So if I comment out the last line and start the Traefik container, the Traefik will pull the certificates. Traefik Dashboard will be available at traefik.simplehomelab.com, but no authentication is available or no middlewares is provided basically. So we're adding some middlewares because we want to protect the services that we expose to the internet using basic authentication. So middlewares, basic auth at file. The at file refers to the file provider, which we are just about to create right now. Okay, let's hit save and then continue back to my guide. Now, everything that I just explained and yapped about is all explained in my guide. So if you feel lost or get confused, always go back to my guide and read through it. There's usually more information in here than what I'm sharing today. Okay, as I said, we'll have to create some middlewares. I think we'll create the middleware first. We need to create 2 different things, but first, the basic auth middleware. Where is it? Right here. So let's copy this right here and go back to my Mobax term and inside my rules folder right there and UDMS folder, we're going to create an empty file, middlewares basic auth.yaml. I like to call my middlewares or the file providers a certain way because there are different kinds of file providers. This one is specifically a middleware, so I prefix it with middlewares in the beginning. The name of the file itself is not so important, but what goes inside is important. The actual name of the middleware is right here. Middleware's basic auth is how Traefik will recognize this middleware. So this is important. And then in that we're saying the basic auth will be provided by the file here, which is the basic auth credentials file we just created. Basic authentication can also be provided right here without the need for a secret file, but we're not using that. We're gonna use an external file to provide the username and password. And what you call the realm is not so important. I am calling it Traefik 3 basic auth. So let's save this file. And yes, I want to save it. The last thing we need to create before the climax is the TLS options file. So if you scroll up, right here is the TLS options file. We're going to copy the contents of this file, go back to my Mobax term and create a new file right here, TLS opts.yaml, and open this file, paste it in here. You don't really need to customize anything, just save it. And I think we finished all the requirements. Let's go back to my super fancy checklist right here. So we finished the secrets, we finished all the files and folders, we created TLS auth, we created the middlewares, we have the Docker compose file, which we jumped ahead and created the T3 proxy network, we added the secrets, we also have the Traefik.yaml compose file. Now is the moment of truth. Now, before we get started, I want to stress one important thing. It's really important to look at this line right here. It says uncomment when testing. Always leave this uncommented when you do Traefik for the first time, because people make mistakes. And if you have this commented out, Traefik is going to try to pull the certificates from the real Let's Encrypt certificates, and if you have mistakes and you keep trying and trying, you will get rate limited and locked out for up to a week. So we don't want that, so we will uncomment this line for now. It's already uncommented. Now we're ready to start Traefik and test it out. Once again, we can use the very long command sudo docker compose -f/home anon docker and docker compose file up-d, but I am fancy, so I'm going to use my bash alias, which would be dc up, and that should start my stack. You can see that it creates the TT proxy network, Socket Proxy network, and then starts the container. At this point, we have to actually follow Traefik logs. How do we do that? We can actually tail the log, the traefik.log file that we had created previously. So tail-f/home anon and docker and logs, continue on to traefik.log, or we can use my fancy bash alias again, which would be Traefik logs, and it should show us the log. As you can see here, the Traefik container started up, it's going through its steps, it's doing some DNS or ACME validations right now. It's waiting for the DNS records to propagate, so this can take some time. This step actually can take a few minutes. So when we come back, we're going to look for some messages that indicate that everything went through successfully. So hang tight. When it's done, we're going to come back and continue. Okay, I am back and I am seeing some encouraging messages right here. If you see on the screen, it says validation succeeded and requesting certificates. This is an indication that everything went well. We should actually be seeing information in the certificate file. So let's check it out, exit out of the logs, and then go to the ACME folder. So it's an app data and Traefik and cd acme, and I'm going to check cat acme.json. So here I am seeing some information already, which is great. If I scroll up there, it shows that certificates were pulled for Simple-Homelab.com, but notice that right here it says staging. So this is still a staging certificate. Now if I open my Google Chrome and visit Traefik.simplehomelab.com, and I am reaching my service, but don't be surprised if you see not secure, because we're still using the staging certificate, and staging certificates are not officially recognized by many browsers. So if I click on not secure right there and look at the certificate information, it says it is a staging certificate. So this is not surprising. Let's try to continue and see. I do not think it will work because I have HSTS turned on. HSTS is a security feature. It won't allow me to continue on an insecure environment. So it's okay for now, but we know that the staging certificate was pulled. So if we go back to my super awesome checklist right here, we can see that staging is complete. Let's go to the real one. Okay, now that our staging is successful, next we're ready to do the real deal. So before that, we'll have to do a couple of minor things. First one obviously is to comment out this line so our request reached the real production Let's Encrypt certificate for validation and receiving the certificate. So let's comment out this line right there and save it. Yes, I want to save it. And we also have to do one minor thing. So we will go to our app data folder, Traefik folder, and ACME folder, and we'll have to empty the contents of the ACME file. You can either delete and recreate the file. If you do so, remember to set the permission 600 for acme.json, which many people forget, or you could just do what I am doing on the screen right now, which is a greater than symbol and JSON, and this should empty the file. So we did that. Now we're going to recreate Traefik and follow the logs. So dc rec, and I'm going to do Traefik logs. Both of these are bash aliases and they will be executed back to back if you do it the way that I am doing right now. So first, recreate the container. Well, I forgot to say dcrec Traefik, so just issuing dcrec is going to recreate the whole stack. In this case, both Traefik and Socket Proxy. I hope that doesn't cause any issues, but if it does, we will see in the logs. Let's wait for the logs. I see the logs right there, and I am seeing some information, found CNAME entries and everything. So I guess Traefik is trying to do the real validation here. Don't worry about these error messages and TLS handshake error messages here, because I have no idea what this IP address is, or it looks like somebody is trying to access my server right now, and they are seeing the insecure and they are seeing the insecure certificate. This is probably why this message is appearing. In fact, let's do this as well. I'm gonna go over to my Chrome window that's open. I'm gonna refresh the screen, and you can see that the certificate is not recognized. And if I go back, I'm going to see a bunch of different TLS handshake errors. Oops, my real IP is now visible. I will have to remember to blur that out. This one right here, I don't care. It's obviously somebody else trying to access my server. In fact, let's take a look. Let's copy this IP address over and let's go run a check. So I'm gonna go over to my Chrome right there and go to shodan.io and copy this IP that was trying to access my server, and let's see where that is from. So as you can see here, I see somebody from Germany. I have no idea. Hetzner is the ISP, and they are trying to access my server. This is why it's really important to have really good authentication layer. Basic auth is not a good authentication layer. It's good to start with, but eventually when everything is successful, make sure to add Authelia or Google OAuth or Authentic. Go one step above. On my website, I have guides on CrowdSec. CrowdSec is a really good intrusion prevention system. In fact, on my website, I've seen DDoS attacks where people are bombarding my server with requests to deny service for legitimate visitors. I've seen this before, and CrowdSec allowed me to mitigate those attacks. So it's really important that you protect your services. Again, in this case, somebody random is trying to access my server from this IP. Let's go back to my server. It's still waiting for the DNS records to propagate. It might take a few minutes, just like we saw in with the staging environment. Okay, while we're waiting, I'm gonna go over here to my guide right there, and let's do a search for CrowdSec, and you are going to see some guides right there. CrowdSec guides right there. Follow those if you're really interested. Okay, so going back to my Traefik guide. Okay, so in this case as well, the validation succeeded, so the real certificate should be pulled right now, and I think we're done. So let's check acme.json file as we did the first time. So I'm gonna do cat acme.json since I'm already in that folder. I see the certificate file, I see the domain name as I did before, and now it doesn't say staging anymore here. So this should be the real certificate. So if I go back right now to my Chrome window where I couldn't open that URL before, I'm gonna refresh, and voila, I see my login. So I'm gonna type in my super secret username and password, and I am in. So give yourself a nice pat on the back right now. It was a long one. We made it through all the way here. This is a real success. So while we are here, let's also check the certificate to make sure that it is right. So if I go in here and look at the certificate, it is from Let's Encrypt. It's valid for 3 months, so we are good to go right there. So then let's also check the HTTPS tab. Here we're going to see some information based on our configuration. I see that we have a router for traefik.simplehomelab.com, which is what we created using Docker labels for this dashboard. We also see a redirect from web to web secure, which is the HTTP to HTTPS redirection router. We should also see the same thing in the middleware or similar things. Middlewares basic auth is the file provider we created to add the authentication layer we just saw. And we also see the redirect from web to web secure, HTTP to HTTPS middleware. Okay, so when we start adding more services, we're going to see a lot more about the services tab right here. And now if we do see any errors during the process of adding services, you will see those errors here as well. If you cannot wait for my next video to come out and you're ready to put your services behind Traefik, Docker and non-Docker, you can always go back to my guide. Right here in putting apps behind Traefik section, you can see I show some examples of apps that you can put behind Traefik. What about those apps that are not running on Docker, or what about those apps that are running in a different host than your Docker host? This is also covered. And if you do encounter errors, you can find information in the troubleshooting section, common errors that people see and how you can fix them. All of these come based on years of supporting different people. What do they say when they reach out to us on our Discord server? How do we help them? What do we find? I keep updating this guide. As you can see, it takes a lot of effort to keep this guide up to date, also provide you examples on my GitHub repo and now this video, and make them all say the same information the exact same way so you guys don't get confused. So if you like my work, I would really appreciate it if you head over to join the Geek Army section right there, and you will find many different ways to support my work, including one-time contributions as you see right here. Buy me a coffee, whatever, every little bit helps. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It was a long one, but it was an exciting one, and hope you can feel the excitement that I feel right now. Otherwise, watch out for my next videos. I'm going to be adding a lot more videos in the coming days. We're going to go through this process together and learn together. And if you haven't realized it already, I'm going through step by step showing you the entire process of how I have built and maintained my home server, which is not fancy by any means, but it does a lot of different things. This is the end of the video. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I will see you in my next video. Go Geek Army.